y'all, Liza here. Today I have the results of the sleeve blind test. Before you skip to the end for the results, I just want to make some things clear. If you're looking for what sleeves would be right for you, I highly recommend watching the reviews for each brand in this video. In the final tier list, I'll give short notes about why a brand placed where it did, but I'm gonna try and keep it all to the review section. On top of that, the final scores include community weights, so if you just want to see what I ranked everything on a scale of 1 to 10 for the different kinds of shuffles and stuff, highly recommend watching the reviews. Also, while this was a blind test, my preferences for what I want in a shuffle still impacted the final scores. Some sleeves are thicker than others, some are more slippery, some just don't feel right. When it comes to friction, we all have our own opinions on what the perfect balance is. Too much and the cards stick together and are difficult to mash. Too little and they slide all over the place and you'll drop them. I personally would rather have too much friction than too little, so my scores reflect that. I'll try my best in the review section to go over what brands this impacted because they were too slippery, so please watch the reviews before asking why brands placed where they did. I also wanted to give a huge thank you to everyone that sent me sleeves that they wanted to participate, be it from the brand themselves or just a big fan of the brand. I'm happy to say that there's no financial involvement from me in any of these sleeves, so the scores don't have any kind of financial impact. There are timestamps for specific brands, the tier lists, when I explain how certain scores work and how they were determined, so go ahead and skip wherever you want to. Those timestamps are down in the description. With all that said, let's get into it. So let's talk about how I scored things. I used a pretty simple method, but under the hood it gets a little complicated. So I wanted to test 3 different shuffle methods: overhand, mash, and riffle, the feeling of a deck search, and card sleeves' different durabilities. For shuffles, I wanted to see how they felt with 60 cards, half a deck, and a late game size deck. And then I also wanted to see how they felt after I played 20 games with them. The reason I chose 20 is because, let's assume you're at a regional and it's an 8-round regional. If you go to game 3 and half of those, and the other half of those finish in game 2, that's 20 games. So that's how I got to that. When doing the different shuffles, I scored them 1 to 10, and then I took the average for each style. So let's go ahead and use the Elite Trainer box scores for an example. Fresh out of the box for overhand shuffle, they got a 3, a 5, and an 8 for the 60, 30, and 15 card variants. That's an average of 5.33 fresh out of the box. Then I played 20 games with them, and then I did the test again. They got 6, 7, and 9 for the same categories, which was an average of 7.3, so their score shows them at an average of 6.3. For deck searches, while blindfolded, I would just fan out the cards repeatedly to see how it felt. I might try grabbing a couple of cards, seeing if I'm able to keep a grip on them, and then I scored them 1 to 5. I did this both before the 20 games and after the 20 games, so their total deck search score adds up to be on a scale of 10. For the damage check, or long lasting, I wasn't blindfolded, but I did a deck check. Pretty simple. I went through the brands, and anytime I saw one that was dented or marked, I took it out. Then I counted up how many were damaged, and I used a scale to determine where they would fall between 1 to 10. And then for the damage test, or how hard they are to damage, I took 3 new sleeves from each brand. I opened the top of them as if I was going to sleeve a card with just a little bit of extra force. If there was any damage, that'd be 1 point. Then I would push the card in all the way, straight to the bottom. If there was damage, that would be another point. And then I would gently flick the corner twice, and if there was damage, that'd be another point. Did that with all 3 sleeves from each brand, and then I took 10, subtracted their total points, and that was their score 1 to 10. Like I said, simple and easy to say 1 to 10, weirdly complicated underneath. Alright, let's get into the brand reviews. First up for the brand reviews, we have the Dragon Shield Dual Mats. Dragon Shield Dual Mats are a bit controversial in most communities due to their quality control. It's led to several sleeves being marked fresh out of the box, or issues like this box had where sometimes the dual matte finish was just off-centered, so one side's black and one side's green while the other side has the opposite pattern. But I didn't examine each brand as I got them out of the box, so I can't actually count that against the Dragon Shield Dual Mats. Across the board, they regularly scored high. They were in the top 4 of almost every single category, but their biggest issue was mash shuffling when they were brand new. They had a lot of friction and required a lot of force in the mash, which caused my wrists to hurt. I think after the 20 games, I actually had to take a break from shuffling because of how much pain I was in. This issue went away as I shuffled them more and when I got later into the tests, but it impacted their final scores pretty heavily, and so I figured it was worth mentioning. If you can deal with the quality control issues and plan on using them for a while, they're definitely a fantastic option. Up next are the regular Dragon Shield mats. They're pretty interesting when compared to the dual mats. While the dual mats were difficult to damage, the regular Dragon Shields took too much damage. Unlike the other sleeves that would just suffer from bent corners and maybe one split in one of the top corners, these had actual rips and splits along the sides of them. But in terms of just shuffling, they were the only brand that got a perfect 10 in mash shuffling when they were fresh out of the box. I'd recommend them to anybody that's just looking to use them for a short while, say a single event that's only like a 4-round local. But if they were going to bring them to a regional, I would definitely need to warn them that they're going to need to re-sleeve in between each and every round. DuelSpecs are pretty popular in the Pokemon community, and I can definitely see why. In terms of shuffling, none of their final scores ranked below a 9, but they're a little too slippery for my liking. But it was never enough to cost them too many points. Maybe if they would have gotten a 10, they got a 9. Similar to the Dragon Shield mats, their biggest issue was definitely durability. When I was doing the durability check after 20 games, they were the 3rd most damaged brand of sleeves. I really liked them, and I can see why players are so excited about them. If you're used to or like your sleeves being extra slippery, I can't recommend them enough. Just be careful when shuffling to avoid damage. It's hard to notice the corners getting caught because of how easily they slide together, but as long as you're aware of it, you should be all set. Eclipse is one of Ultra Pro's brands, and I'll be honest, these were miserable. Brand new, these stuck together so much. Aside from the Elite Trainer boxes, they were the only brand to score below an 8 in riffle shuffling, and a 5 or lower on deck searching. On top of that, they suffered more damage than any other sleeve. Again, aside from the Elite Trainer boxes. I will say, once I broke them in, they kind of felt great mash shuffling, but the damage to them means that I'd have to replace them so often that the sleeves would never be fully broken in. Kind of a weird Ship of Theseus sleeve problem. There isn't much I can say about these that's positive. I don't like them, I don't recommend them, and I don't want to talk about them anymore. EndGame is another brand that's recently gotten the Pokemon community super hyped. They stick together a bit more than I'd like, but I would rather have that than the cards sliding everywhere. These aren't necessarily bad sleeves, I actually like them quite a bit, but when it comes to what the community cares most about, being mash shuffling and durability, the brand seems to struggle. They aren't the worst in either of these categories, but they're in the middle of the pack for them, which is enough for it to be noteworthy. But if you prefer riffle shuffling to mash shuffling, you can avoid both the issues since the corners can't get cut while you're riffling. I'd recommend these to anybody that does enjoy riffle shuffling, but if you're a mash shuffler, probably not. The Elite Trainer box sleeves. What is there to say about them? These are the worst of the worst sleeves. Someone told me they changed up the manufacturing of the sleeves and it should have made them better to shuffle as well as have better durability, but I did not have that experience with these. These were the most damaged, they scored the least in every single category, and they just felt horrible. The only benefit they have is that they all got so damaged that you couldn't be called for having marked cards because every single one of them is marked. They're still super cute and nice for new players or kids that don't shuffle as aggressively as the rest of us, but I could never recommend using Elite Trainer box sleeves to someone who's actually serious about the game. Now, FCBC Armor is a bit of a weird brand. When overhand shuffling or riffle shuffling, deck searching even, they slide around just a tiny bit more than I want them to. But when mash shuffling, they have a tiny bit more friction than I want. It's a little strange that they managed to pull off both, but in terms of mash shuffling, they were constantly in the top 3 for every section. Even better, after 20 games, their friction/slip issue was almost entirely gone. They were one of the most consistent brands in shuffling, being one of the 3 brands to score 9 or higher in all 3 styles, the other 2 being DuelSpec and the Dragon Shield Dual Mats, and they were the least damaged brand after 20 games. Their biggest issue is that when deck searching, they slide around a lot, but I never managed to actually drop any. Overall, good brand, super impressed, and I highly recommend them. Next we have Immaculates, and I'll be honest, prior to the blind test, I did give each brand a short shuffle. I thought for sure that Immaculate would win the entire thing and walk away being the best brand. I even messaged the brand that contacted me about it and told them such. But after the tests, I'm a little disappointed. When mashing, the corners just keep getting caught. I guess when I wasn't blindfolded, I wasn't paying enough attention and didn't notice it, but it happened non-stop during the tests, and it cost them a lot of points. Despite this, they didn't suffer too much, if any, damage. They secured the best scoring in riffle shuffling and the best scoring in deck searching. I do like this brand, and similar to some of the other brands, if you prefer riffle shuffling over mash shuffling, I highly recommend these. Even now, I'm kind of shocked at how low their mash score ended up, because they feel pretty great. Iridians. This was a brand I hadn't heard of before the blind test, and I was pretty surprised at how good they are. BCW is the brand that's responsible for bringing us top loaders, storage bins, binders, dice trays, playmats, a lot more. Iridian is their brand of card sleeves, and it kind of flopped. They're sold out on their website, but you're still able to find them on Amazon or other card store websites. And I reached out to them about maybe doing a restock, and they never replied, but it has only been a week. They felt fantastic in most forms of shuffling, but there was a slight dip in quality after the 20 games. They started gaining a lot of friction and became difficult to shuffle them, to the point where my wrist started to hurt. On top of that, they suffered a lot of damage after 20 games. Similar to the Dragon Shield Mats, these are the best when they're brand new, and if you don't plan on reusing them for more than a 4-round local, they're probably the best brand out there. Now, we're all familiar with katanas. After all, in the Pokemon community, we see posts about them more than any other brand on Twitter. But I'll be honest, I don't like them. They slide around way too much, kept having their corners get caught, and took a lot of damage. In terms of shuffling, they felt like worse dual specs across the board. The only thing that they did better is that their corners didn't get as banged up during shuffling, but it wasn't by much. If you're a Katana fan or have been interested in trying them out, I really recommend just going to DuelSpec instead. Now, the KMC Mats are mostly a brand that caters to Japanese-sized cards, card games like Yu-Gi-Oh!, Cardfight Vanguard, stuff like that. So I was interested to see how they'd perform with standard-sized cards, and I learned why they haven't exactly caught on around here. Their mash shuffling was the worst overall, aside from the Elite Trainer boxes. The amount of force you need to shuffle them and how often their corners get caught, plus how thick they feel compared to all the other brands, makes them one of the worst mash experiences I've ever had. Durability-wise, though, they were one of the best brands. They also got better to mash after breaking them in, so if you have a cube, retro deck, or anything like that, these are probably the sleeves that I would recommend. They're long-lasting, and the issues I had lessened the more that I played with them, so I could very easily see them being the brand to use for a long time. The last brand is the KMC Phoenixes. The other KMC brand, the Mats, are a completely different story. These are one of the best mash experiences I've had, which is why I got confused when I saw how their scores ended up looking out. They were regularly awarded 10s during the tests, but the issue is that at the end of some tests, if I gave out too many 10s, I'd take 1 point away from everybody else, and then have the 10s battle it out. The best ones would stay 10s, and the worst ones would go down to 9s. And in pretty much all of those tests, the Phoenixes got bumped down to 9s. The 10s were just better at their specific niche. So you could say that they're incredibly consistent. On top of that, they suffered because of how easy they are to damage. If a corner does get caught, or you're just too rough sleeving, that sleeve is going to get damaged. When looking at the scores, they got a little bit worse as time went on, but their overall scores did go up. If you're planning on using a sleeve just for one regional and then never again, I would go with the KMC Phoenixes. So with the reviews out of the way, it's time to work on the tier list. Well, kinda. Before I can do that, I have to tell you about how the scores I showed you during the reviews changed into the final scores. If you don't care about math or learning about weighted averages, you can just skip this. There's a timestamp down below. So, a week ago, I made a Google form to find out what people cared about when picking the best sleeves. I got 128 responses and then closed it. I had everyone rank certain things on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 being, I don't take this into consideration, and 5 being, this is the most important thing. There were some things on the forum that I didn't want to comment on. Price, color options, availability. Those are things you can't really rank objectively. To every person, $1 has a different meaning. The important colors versus variety of colors is too difficult of a discussion to apply a good ranking system to. And availability changes depending on the lengths you're willing to go to in order to get sleeves. So I ultimately did not use those when scoring brands. From the remaining options, I found the average ranking of that item. So over here, you can see the different types of things, and this was the average ranking for that item. To figure out their weight, I just added them together, and then divided that number by the sum, and that gave me this percent. And so, with those percentages, I just had to multiply the score by those. If you remember your high school syllabi, imagine overhand being 13% of your grade, mass shuffling being 20%, stuff like that. And so once we multiply all of those by these percentages, we get the final score out of 100. So knowing what you know, let's get into that tier list. Alright, so with all the math, tests, sales pitch, shuffling, it's time to see where things rank at the end of the day. Just one last time, I want to remind you that my preferences for texture did have an impact on some scores. So if you want to know why certain brands scored how they did, check the reviews. So let's see what those rankings look like after applying the weights. In the bottom tier, we have, to nobody's surprise, the Elite Trainer Box sleeves. These were horrible. No one is shocked they are here. They got a 30 out of 100. We're just gonna keep moving. One tier directly above them, with almost double their points, are the Ultra Pro Eclipses. Between the durability issues and their horrible shuffling, I'm surprised they beat the Elite Trainer Box by how much they did, but the Elite Trainer Box sleeves were pretty bad. I have to make another new tier because 10 points above that is Katanas. These were an awful mashing experience, and they had so much damage done to them that I do not understand the hype for them. In almost every single metric, they are just worse dual specs. There's no question in my mind that if someone is using Katanas, I'm going to refer them to swap over to dual specs. That said, I do want to mention that from this point on, I would use any of the remaining sleeves, and I wouldn't complain about it. I think all of the remaining brands are good brands, and while I have my own preferences and there's a clear ranking that I'm doing, I think every single brand from here on out is a good brand. So with all that said, at the very bottom of the usable tier, we have DuelSpecs. DuelSpecs slid around a lot, but their biggest issue was their durability. The only two brands that placed lower than them in durability was the Elite Trainer Boxes and the Eclipses. So, with how much the community appreciates durability, it makes sense that DuelSpecs placed as low as they did. Interestingly though, they were only one of 3 brands that maintained all their shuffle scores above a 9. so I get why the community hyped them up so much. Just above them, but in the exact same tier, are going to be the Dragon Shield single mats. Similar to DuelSpecs, they were a great shuffling experience, but they took too much damage in the long run. I personally would prefer DuelSpecs over the Dragon Shield single mats, but because of the durability scores, they do place a little lower. One tier up from that, we have EndGame. EndGame, just like all those that ranked before it, just struggle with durability. But their riffle shuffle feels incredible, and if you riffle, you can dodge damaging them. So I do think these are great sleeves. I have some friends that riffle shuffle instead of mass shuffling, and this is one of the brands that I would recommend them to try out. In the exact same tier as them, we have the Dragon Shield dual mats. While the extra matte layer does make them less likely to get damaged, it adds a level of thickness to the sleeves that's noticeable when performing a deck search or a mass shuffle. The cards feel bulkier and they begin to stick together, but they didn't split during any of the tests, which is better than my first experience using them in a regional, where before the end of round 9, I had more than 10 of them split. So maybe Dragon Shield's working on their quality control issues. Still, these just miss out on getting into S tier. Moving right along, we have 3 brands that are in the S- tier. All of these brands easily could have won, but each of them just had one issue holding them back. The first brand that's going to be entering here is going to be the KMC Hyper Mattes. These were good sleeves. They did well in both damage categories and have an okay shuffle, but their downfall is mass shuffling, which the community cares a lot about. Their corners repeatedly get caught, and while it didn't leave behind any damage, it was enough to drastically hurt their score. Also in this 83-point range are going to be Immaculates. I said it during their review portion that this brand feels great to me. Despite having worse durability metrics than the Hyper Mattes, their shuffling constantly ranked higher, and deck searching feels great with them. In the exact same tier, and the very last ones before moving on to our big 2, are the KMC Phoenixes. This brand ranked the highest in mass shuffling, but just they couldn't make up for how slippery they were during deck searches and how easily they got damaged. When their corners did end up sticking together, it did ruin the sleeve. Both KMC brands, though, were really good, and I'm happy somebody was able to recommend them to me. We have the last 2 brands of sleeves, and sliding into second place is going to be Iridian. I'm a little shocked by this because both of their durability scores were 7, but they were one of 2 brands to get a perfect 10 in deck search, the other being Immaculates, and they maintained a good mash plus overhand shuffle. If the brand improved their durability, they would be in first, but unfortunately, the manufacturer, BCW, still hasn't responded to my email about a potential restock, so who knows if any more Iridians are on the way. Which brings us to our winner. The best sleeve brand has to be FCBC Armor. These sleeves were consistently great. As I've mentioned before, there were only 3 brands to score 9 or higher in all 3 shuffle styles, and FCBC was one of them. It was also the least damaged brand after 20 games played, and were decently difficult to damage. During the damage tests, I even double-checked to make sure that they weren't taking any damage because I thought maybe their coloring was making me miss something. One of their only downsides is that I disliked how short they were. A lot of the cards during shuffling looked like they were about to peek out over the edge. But the team at FCBC informed me that their new sleeve colors, rose gold and blood red, are a millimeter taller, and the other colors they carry are soon going to be the same height. So I'm looking forward to using them. Congratulations to FCBC on winning, and if you want to pick up your own set, head on over to their website, fcbcarmor.com. These are incredible sleeves, they're really consistent, and again, their durability was just great. I love these, and I am definitely going to keep using them moving forward. And so here it is, the sleeve blind test tier list. FCBC being the winners might surprise some people. The KMC mats come out really good for cube shuffling. DuelSpecs are just across the board better than Katanas. And BCW should start restocking their Iridian sleeves. Let me know what you think. If you disagree with any of the rankings or why I put a brand where I did, just let me know in the comments or on my socials. You can find me on Twitter or Blue Sky with the handle Eliza Sheep Posts. And if you haven't checked out the brand reviews individually in this video, I recommend it. Or you could check out my other 5-hour video that uploaded alongside this one. It's the unedited, kind of cut tests. Just the raw footage of me shuffling and scoring and making comments. I probably watched through it myself 2 or 3 times just to make sure that I took all the appropriate notes. I'll be bringing these sleeves, except the ETB sleeves, with me to Toronto Regionals this weekend, so if you want to try the blind test, try and find me while I'm there. If I make day 2, I'll try finding somebody to hand the sleeves off to so that way they can run it for me, but I'm excited to see what everybody says, and who knows, maybe you'll find out you like a brand that you've never heard of before. I hope to see you all in Toronto. Thank you for watching, and thank you for all of your support during this. Couldn't have done it without you. See you around. Also, I forgot to give associate producer credit to my wife, who handed me everything while I was blindfolded and kept me sane during this. So thank you, honey. You can go now. Thank you. I love you.